What's going on, people? Okay, we're back. We're in my dark. We're not in my dark and twisted crazy ass mind. This is the place where it's not just about my mind. We're in the main discussion topic for this week's episode of the Awakened Soul podcast. And so, this week, what do we have to discuss? Creative narcissism. So, I'm sure everyone at this place has either interacted, knows a narcissism, loves a narcissist, are a narcissist. But I think it's easy to talk about narcissism generally, right? Because it's a serious psychological issue. We often, at many times, focus about the bad side of narcissism. There are some positive things that can come out of narcissism in a degree, but not being a narcissist. Maybe that's another episode, because this may end up being a whole series. Because I know after this, there's going to be a lot of questions, a lot of interaction, a lot of probably pushback on some of my ideas, and that's absolutely fine, right? I always say that these discussion topics are the beginning of the conversation. They are not the full conversation. I'm just here having it with myself, which I don't know, is that a sign of narcissism? But we'll get it, and I'll make light of it because, like I said, we're not getting to the psychological issue of being a narcissist. There is absolutely a serious thing there. I'm not one equipped to deal with. I would love to. If anybody who's listening to me is a psychologist or a mental health professional and would like to talk about and break down narcissism, both the positive traits that can come out of it, the negative side, I would love to have that conversation. That's one that I would love to do. I haven't had a psychologist on since year 2 of the Awakened Soul, I think, early in year 2. But so first, let's set some, I guess, pillars, define some things, right? Narcissists are often described as ambitious, disagreeable, emotionally stable, which is some things that people don't always realize, is that sometimes people think the narcissists aren't emotionally stable. They're very emotionally aware and stable. That's how they can be manipulative. But that's not what we're talking about here. Sorry. Motivated, less flexible, and a low need for rules. And the things that we're going to focus on here are a sense of entitlement and a need for admiration. And so you will find narcissism, especially in a creative or the art world, anything that somebody is creating art, right, is because almost every creative displays some level of narcissism, right? Is that, and this is there's been whole research done on this, on that creativity and narcissism is highly related, and that some of the most praiseworthy qualities in a creative are can be labeled as narcissistic traits. And so it's funny to just think about how that relates. Like, some of the same things that we admire in our favorite artists, in our favorite creatives, in our favorite musicians, in whatever, it can be drawn from a place of narcissism, right? They have some of those traits that narcissists have. And look, that doesn't mean that they can't be controlled. That doesn't mean that they're not being controlled. Doesn't means that person is any less admirable. It's just that we have to identify and admit that some of those traits do overlap. And so where I want to speak about specifically from the creative standpoint, right, is how narcissism affects us as creatives, and that some of the mental traps that can be detrimental to our success and growth in being a creative. And that first one is, I talked about it a little bit before, that sense of entitlement. And this is the thing that I'm going to start the basis off with this, right? When I say sense of entitlement, I mean this. Sometimes us as creatives, we get stuck in an I deserve mindset, right? Meaning that because we put in the time, because we put in the work, because we know what we're doing, because we done all this research, because we put all this effort in, that we deserve success, or we deserve notice, that we deserve whatever comes along from our art. Not only can this stunt our creativity, but it also implies that we have lost that drive to improve. Being stuck in an I deserve mindset can keep us from innovating, right? And as something who as art continually evolves, especially if you're in this creative space with podcasts or YouTube or whatever, if you get stuck in a place of not innovating anymore, your work starts stagnating. And that stagnation can come from a couple of different things, which we'll talk about, right? But if we change that I deserve mindset to I desire, right? And the difference that that does in us is that if we're desiring to create the best that we can rather than feeling that we deserve just for creating, it drastically changes our mindset. Creating something at our absolute best, us being in our absolute best, what we create being the absolute best that we can do, it continues to redefine itself over and over. And like the best constantly evolves. And if you figure out, if you change that mindset from I deserve to I desire to continually be the best, the bar continually gets risen and changed and everything. So if you change that I deserve to an I desire, that puts the onus back on continue to innovate. It takes the ego out of it. And it allows us to know that we have never reached the ceiling of where we can go. And if we focus on that, it takes away some of that narcissistic traits in being a creative. If we focus our mindset on improving our work rather than our work deserving attention for what it gets, it's that attention that sometimes we strive for, that we need for our product, for our base, just comes naturally because we're continually resetting the bar. We're continually getting better and better. So that I deserve, being stuck in an I deserve mindset is completely detrimental to creativity, and it does have that narcissistic trait. Because ultimately, even if we feel we're the best, it doesn't mean we're always going to be the best. But even if you feel you're the best and you get stuck in that and you stop innovating, then you won't be the best anymore. You're not even the best of what you got to continually raise that bar. And if you do that, again, that takes some of that narcissistic traits out of what we do in being in this creative space. Number 2, the need for admiration. And this is something that it's weird, right? And as I go into this, like I said, this may be the ones that people disagree with the most, but it's social media is a almost required beast in what we do creatively at this point. If you're going to be a creative, if you're going to promote what you do, whatever it is, if you're doing that, social media is going to play a role in that. It's just, there's no way around that. So the way that I'm linking the social media aspect to the need for admiration, how I'm linking that need for admiration to the social media aspect is that we can find ourselves as creatives, that engagement, those likes, they start becoming what it gives us that immediate feedback into, okay, well, what I'm doing is good. And you watch your engagement, watch your shares, watch your likes. But where it starts becoming that narcissistic trait of need for admiration is that then we start, or how it starts affecting our creativity is that then we start creating for the likes rather than focused on it in a positive mind space. Just think about it. And whether everybody wants to admit it or not, that rush of dropping an episode that everyone likes. Let's say, for example, for something, like I said early in this episode during the Mind of Haize segment, I don't really like covering what's trending on Twitter unless it's something that I'm going to have a lot to say about anyway. But let's say for some reason that me talking about Lil Nas X and the blood in the shoe thing for some reason blows up. People are talking about it. People love the way that I talked about it, whatever. It gets a lot of likes, it gets a lot of shares, it gets a lot of engagement. That need for admiration, if that's what I'm focused on, is the need for admiration rather than creating, it can then possibly lead me down a place to be like, oh, well, the next time I'm gonna talk about what got everyone going, what has people outraged the most on Twitter. And then we start creating for the engagement and for the likes and less for our own satisfaction. Is that am I saying that correctly? Nonetheless, but the thing that we need to realize is that if we focus on talking about what is popular at the time, that makes us less of a creative and less of an artist and just makes us more of a reflection of what's popular at that time. Do you want to be a creator and an innovator, or do you just want to be a reflection of what's going on currently? And you'll find yourself, and that's why I say it's the trap that we get in, because if you start creating just by being a reflection of what's going on around you, that shit has a shelf life. And also, like, it's not as it doesn't flex us as an artist as much if all we can create is things that are already popular. And so when we get caught up in creating for the engagement, creating for the likes, and focus on that rather than building a strategy, it feeds into that need for admiration. So, like I did with the last one, how can we take that and flip that and make that less of a narcissistic trait and not narcissistic idea and focus on the creativities? What I kind of just said. Build a strategy that highlights your art rather than your art being a reflection of what's popular at that time. Switch the focus from you as an artist to the project or the work that you're doing. And that's something that we do and something for me. This is coming from somebody who calls themselves the content king, right? And there's several revelations about myself that I'm coming to even in this, right? I call myself the content king. And yes, that's branding, that's everything else. But by doing that and just coming to a realization is that I am making it more about me than the content I create when I say that. And sometimes I say that at the top of the show, and I always say that like what I create here at the Awakened Soul is my legacy and everything like that. But the whole content king brand was me making it more about me than my work. And when we do that, that is a very narcissistic trait. When we make it more about us, the creative, us, the artist, look at me, highlight me, whatever else, it makes it about us. And that feeds into our need for admiration. Whereas on the flip side of that, if we focus it rather on the work and create a strategy that highlights our work rather than us, then it takes away it cuts out some of that narcissistic mindset and narcissistic traits in being a creative, right? And so that helps in a couple of different ways. There's positive and negative ways that shifts us, right? Is that when we don't get the engagement that we think that we deserve, to go back to the I deserve mindset, or that we need, or that doesn't feel that need for admiration, then we start feeling down on ourselves, the person, the creative, right? Whereas if we change that and we focus the fact that our engagement is coming because of what we create, and we build a strategy to highlight what we create rather than us, if for some reason it doesn't get the engagement that you need, it goes back into let me work harder on the next thing that I create, and let me create a better strategy that highlights that more. Let's not readjust our focus. Let's not readjust our focus on getting attention for our work, or the notice that we feel we deserve for our work, and let's readjust that thinking on creating a better strategy, whether that be for how we release, how we promote, how we deliver the content that we're creating. And when you focus on that, it cuts out some of the narcissistic traits. Number 3 in this 4 things that we're going to talk about, recognize how positive and negative comments affect how you see yourself. And it's easy. Like, let's just say to say that let's not pay attention that much to negative comments is easy. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I want to talk about how we let positive comments inflate our ego, which is inherently narcissistic, right? We take the reinforcement from positive comments and allow it to guide how and what we create. And that keeps us in a place of creating similar content to what we talked about before, to feed off that positivity, to continue feeling that high off those positive comments and things. We start, and there's a thin line between that, right? Because you do want to create what your base is liking, and your audience will tell you something. But if you're creating art, right, you can't let the art determine that. You created that original thing that got noticed because of what? Because it was hopefully what you were passionate about. And if you continue to focus on that passion and innovating, rather than focus on the admiration you got for a particular piece of work, it will keep you out of falling into that narcissistic thing of where we just fall into an echo chamber of only taking in and relying on the positive comments. Positive comments can be as detrimental to your mental health as a creative as negative ones can be to somebody who is as unsure of themselves. Appreciate the fact that your art is being appreciated, right? Or well received, to not use appreciated twice. Appreciate the fact that your art is being well received, and use that to continue fueling you innovating rather than stagnating and creating the same thing over and over and over again. I'm a sports person, right? And if you find that people try to recreate that same magic sometimes in other teams that they started from, it's not there. It's not the same. It's not there. And that's because, like, if you focus on not innovating, and that's overall what this keeps going back to. A big way of keeping narcissism from flowing into your creativity is focusing on the innovating rather than the ego. But nonetheless, right? So positive comments, especially because in my theory and thesis that I'm basically laying out here, is that narcissism and creativity can overlap so well, is that positive comments can keep you in that narcissistic mindset, because we keep chasing after that admiration. We keep chasing after that same high. We allow those likes, we allow those follows, we allow those retweets, we allow those conversations to make us create from a place of trying to regain that every time, rather than focusing on the art that we're trying to create by even doing this. Now, and I know we said we're not going to stay a lot on the negative side because that's the easy part to talk about, but separating the idea that any constructive criticism comes from haters. That is a huge thing and narcissistic trait in this online community, or this creative community, in this artist community, is that anything that's labeled as a criticism is you file it away as hate, and you throw it and you don't think about it. If you're receptive to the flaws that other people see in your art and what you may be doing, it allows you to keep innovating. Even if you don't see that as a fault, and again, don't let that completely change what you're doing. But if you can take that negative comment, regardless of how it was presented or said, whether it was said with tact or without, but if you can take that and realize, okay, they may have said it this way, and maybe I don't see it as a flaw, but maybe it's something that I can build upon to improve what I'm doing. We have to remove that sense of self-being that we attach to our work and just focus on creating the best that we can. Removing our ego and who we are as a person from the feedback from our work goes a long way in separating that narcissism and creativity. A critique on your work isn't a critique on you as a person. And again, I'm gonna say that a critique on your work or what you're creating or your art is not a critique on who you are as a person. And once you learn to separate that personal attachment, the feeling like and I get it, we as creatives, and I say this all the time, like with this podcast, I pour every bit of me. So there is a bit of me, a lot of me in this podcast, in this art, in the films, whatever it is that I'm creating. There's absolutely a piece of me that is implanted and imprinted onto that. But even with that being said, a critique upon my work is not a critique on the person and who I am at the core. And if you can separate that ego from that and hear that, even sometimes there are things that you can take from the haters. And I said this I think I had a whole discussion topic built around it before, is that I can feed off your hate just as well as I can feed off the positivity you throw my way. And by that I mean is that I always say, hate doesn't have to be returned. I don't have to return that energy. Positivity doesn't either, but if you bring positivity my way, I personally, as just a human, feel inclined to return that positivity back to you. But if you give hate my way and you can repurpose that hate energy that was thrown your way and put that into improving your art or using it for motivation, whatever else it is, you don't have to return that. You put that in your work. So if we learn to take our ego out of what we're creating, take it out of our art, and put the focus back in on the art itself, right? The art itself, it removes some of those narcissistic traits that I've been talking about on this episode. So that is like overall how I have determined and wanted to talk about how narcissism and creativity overlap a lot of times. And then, I mean, overall, like I said, and there's going to be a lot of creatives that hear this, that don't agree, that do agree, that feel like it's just passion, it's not narcissism. And I would love to have those conversations with you. Matter of fact, if you are a creative and you hear this episode and for some reason you disagree and you want to have that conversation with me, I'm completely open to it. Like I said, these are living conversations that I like to think that I'm creating here on the Awakened Soul. And so this is something that, like, if you can't tell, like it really, once that idea sparked in me, like I said early on, it's something that I had to talk about and I really wanted to hopefully do justice with. Hopefully you guys feel I did justice with it on this episode. Like I said, not a super long episode because, I mean, the facts are, my opinion on it is out there now and it's clear, and hopefully I outlined it in a way that made sense to a lot of people. And so that's really it on the Awakened Soul this week. What we got coming up, we'll talk about it. We got some shit coming up. But this is going to be a great year for the Awakened Soul. Make sure you check out all of my podcasts. We recently brought Love, Lust, and Badass Soul back. The Film Frequency will be returning here soon. Shout out to JB. My brother's JB's birthday was on March 28th, the day after this episode dropped. So shout out. Listen, there is a handful of people that I have met from this podcasting thing that have become lifelong friends. And while I met JB before the Awakened Soul, that was back when I was doing the wrestling podcast, that's my brother. Like, you can't tell me shit. That is my brother. So shout out to him. And just thank you guys for the continued support. Even through my content king narcissistic ways, sometimes I appreciate every single one of you guys. Make sure you're following the podcast at Awakened Soul Pod. You can follow me personally at CEO Haize. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, theawakenedsoulpod@gmail.com. If you want to send us a voicemail, you can do so, 614-547-2039. We are the #1 podcast for the culture. I love each and every one of you guys. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.